We're going to start with Mikael, the founder of Crew. Crew, as I said, a Montreal-based company that connects invite-only independent designers and developers with curated projects. In just over 2 years, Crew has posted over $20 million in projects and supports members in 32 countries. While at Crew, Mikael and his team created Unsplash, that wonderful photography site that we probably all use that offers free, unlicensed, high-quality images used by companies like Facebook, Google, Pinterest, Twitter, Dynamo, and Apple. Please welcome Mikael Cho.
Is my mic on? Yeah, okay. I'll put this here. All right. This is my first slide. So, yes, I'm Mikael. I'm founder of Crew and Unsplash, and I called this presentation a story of romance and reality. We started Crew here in Montreal 3 years ago, but not too long ago, pretty much everybody thought we were going to die. And this story starts actually back in a whole nother country. So I'm originally from the US. 7 years ago, I graduated university from Wisconsin, took a trip down to Mexico, and I actually ended up meeting my now wife. So she happened to be there with her family. I was there with my friends, and I remember looking through and seeing her in the pool, and I was like, I'm going to marry that girl one day. And I know it's really like hopelessly romantic, and my friend's like, you're definitely not going to do that. But I felt something. I thought she was really pretty. So the next day I went down to the pool, and we actually got to speak, and we spoke multiple days all through the night. And then I was like, yes, I'm really going to come visit you. I'm going to make this happen. I know a lot of people say this all the time. They're going to come visit. But this is something that I actually really, really wanted to do. So went back home, told my parents, I know I just came from Mexico, but now I'm going to go to Montreal. I met a girl. They said, okay, that's interesting. You don't have a job. You're $40,000 in student debt. I had just graduated university. I don't know how you're going to get there. So I asked my dad, because the bank actually wouldn't give me a credit card. So he had to co-sign on a line of credit for $1,500. That's all they would give me. And then I had to figure out how to get to Montreal. So I posted something on Facebook, and luckily one of my friends, he's like, hey, we actually have a soccer tournament in Montreal next weekend. We're playing Concordia University, which happened to be the university of my now wife, and they're having a soccer game, and she was on the women's soccer team. So they were playing each other. So it was this crazy mix of turn of events, and I said, well, can I take a one-way bus with you guys and just put me on the roster as a manager, however it needs to be, and that'll get me to Montreal. So they said, sure, yeah, that's not a problem at all. So I ended up in Montreal. This is about a week after we had met in Mexico, and I didn't quite get the whole dynamic between the languages. So I didn't expect English, French. I started seeing these signs, bonjour, rue, different street names, and I'm like, I don't know what these things mean. This might be a little harder than what I originally thought. Then I showed up at her parents' house, and they're like, hey, isn't that guy from Mexico? And so I found out that my now wife actually didn't tell them that I was coming to visit with no money. And she lived with her parents. So, the first night, they're wondering what to do with me. They're Catholic, Italian, very strict. They actually never had family members sleep over. And I'm looking, at hostels. I had no money, figuring out where to stay. They weren't comfortable with me going anywhere else. So eventually they come up to me and they said, okay, we never ever do this. And her dad, he kind of looks like Robert De Niro. So he comes up to me and he says, we never do this, but you can stay here, but you can't sleep with Steph, my wife. So, and you can't sleep downstairs because we have infrared sensors on the first floor. So you're going to have to sleep with her brother. And her brother is 6'1", 17 years old, single bed. And he didn't know this was coming, so it's like 10 p.m. So I walk upstairs, and I said, Chris, your dad said I have to sleep with you. Chris, we can sleep back to back. Everything's going to be fine. Don't worry. But this is how it's got to be. So eventually, I did that for 3 months. And eventually... Eventually, they turned off the sensors. This is a real thing. They had infrared sensors, so if you stepped on the first floor, it would go off. They had enough comfort with me to say, okay, you can stay in the basement. So eventually, they set me up in the basement. This is actually the couch in the basement where crew would eventually start. But it was a really special thing that they did because I had all this debt, wasn't figuring anything out, couldn't get a job because I couldn't speak French. And they said, instead of paying rent or food, you just pay your loans every dime you make, and you stay here. And I actually lived there for the last 6 years. So I moved out 2 years ago. That was partially because we couldn't move in together until we were married. So I was living in the basement. So around this time, one of the first jobs that I was able to get here was at a design agency. And I didn't have a background in design at all. But I started to get really connected to the field. I saw a lot of things that were being created, really interesting, started working a lot with designers and developers, but I also saw a lot of the problems that were happening. So our firm, we're designed to do creative work, but there was a huge chunk of our budget and the time that everybody was spending on all this management stuff. So like legal, finance, accounting, and none of it was happening during creative work. So I said, maybe there's something different that we could try. There's something that changes this model a bit. So I actually left with one of the developers who was there. We started a small studio, and our idea was to kind of, how could we do this better, do it our own way, and build some products on the side. Around the same time, we heard about a program that just started here in Montreal. It was called Founder Feel, and this is like startup school. So basically you have 3 months, they give you a bit of money, see what you can do, and at the end of it, you pitch to investors. I had no idea how any of this thing worked, but the way that I looked at it as, so they were going to give you $27,000, and we hadn't signed any sort of major clients. So I was like, $27,000 to build whatever we want. So imagine a client came up to you and said that. Here's $27,000 for the next 3 months. You can build whatever you want, and we'll take 6% of your business. We didn't have a business. We just had a whole bunch of ideas. So I said, that's a pretty good bargain. Hell yeah, we're in. So there was 300 teams that applied. We were one of the 10 that got accepted, which presented us with another challenge. So this was the first check that we ever got, $27,000. We actually couldn't cash it because we didn't have a bank account. So they put a hold on our stuff for the first month, so nobody made any money. But we were happy. We had something, and we were building one product. We were able to focus on something. The problem was a lot of other people were kind of confused. Hey, there's this company coming in. They don't have a company. They just have a whole bunch of ideas. The first week, you have to present to all the mentors of this program, and they were kind of confused. So this is our table after we told them our idea. And nobody really knew what we were doing. Nobody knew how we got in. I didn't know how we got in after this. And things weren't looking good. So we had 3 months to figure something out, though. And we started thinking about all these different ideas. Eventually, we landed on this idea of a concept for app makers. And it was sort of like this Kickstarter type model, but for apps. So one of the big challenges, if you make an app, in order to sustain yourself, you pretty much have to get featured. And 95% of apps don't get featured. So we said, hey, if we could help app makers build a following before that happens, maybe at least you can launch with some people who really care about what you're building. So we made a lot of progress because we had nothing. So going from nothing to a little is pretty good. We ended up presenting at the end of the program. We had grown from 150 app makers to 1,400 in about 2 weeks. So this looked like a big jump. And about 3 months later, we ended up securing a larger investment of $500,000. And we were on the cover of TechCrunch, had never been there before. Like, wow, this is crazy. Never expected this to happen. We thought we were going to make it. You know, our traffic went crazy. And then the next day, so it went back down. And it stayed like that for a very long time. We were trying to figure things out. We didn't quite know what was working. 6 months going by, nothing's really hitting. Investors, people stopped believing in us. I started getting emails like this. Hi, Mikael, are you guys still alive? I got one actually this past year too. And we didn't know exactly what to do. We had about 6 months worth left of money. And what we saw a lot actually from our customers was like, hey, great, you can help me build a following for my product, but I'm actually having trouble building the actual product. And I actually need help from somebody making it first so we can eventually build something and get it out in the world. So one of the ways that we tried to come up with a new idea is we actually wrote down a whole bunch of ideas. We wrote down all the nouns that we could think of, so just random words like weddings, dogs, and then on the other side, we mixed with sites like Facebook and Uber. So we were like, okay, Facebook for weddings, Uber for dogs. And we were trying to think, okay, what could we build? We could build anything, because no one's going to give us another dime. And we're already out of almost all the money, so let's figure out something cool that we really care about. So something that got our wheels actually turning for something that we would eventually create that we thought was really interesting was this little pie chart. And it was sort of the intersection of three things. Is it a big market? Could we be the best at it? And do we actually care about what the thing is? When you think that no one's going to give you any more money, you might as well do something really, really interesting. And I think you should do that anyway. But when your back's up against the wall and you're not looking for opportunity, you're looking to do something really interesting with the time that you have. So we thought back to those problems. We thought back to what customers told us with Oomph. We actually had trouble finding a designer and developer, somebody to actually build the product. We thought back to when we were freelancers and working at the studio. We were like, oh, there's a problem here. People need high-quality people to work with. They want to work on good projects. One of the biggest challenges as a freelancer is consistency. That's your number one challenge, is how do you get consistent, high-quality work? Even if you're good, sustaining that over time, you'll have these ebbs and flows. Maybe we could create something that would sustain that. Great in theory, but we don't have much time. We have 6 months. We have to move fast. So that afternoon, this is the original business plan. We drew it up quick on a whiteboard: problem, solution, what would make us unique, how we would start. And if there was a business, we needed to prove it, and we needed to prove it really fast. So we actually didn't write any code. On the first day, this was our website. This was a newsletter made with Wufoo, which is just a free form creator, and you could submit a project. And we did everything manually. So we wrote to everybody by email and said, hey, we saw that you maybe had a project. If you wanted to post it here, we're going to have high-quality people, and we're going to send them out every Saturday. So the first weekend, we had $20,000 in projects that were posted through this. And we said, hey, that's a really good start. So now we said, but we have to prove that there might actually be a business here. So our next step was, let's accept payment, and we can figure out how to take a transaction, and we'll make sure that the results are good. So this is the essence of Crew. And if these two things could work, we're like, okay, maybe we'll have an actual business. This was tricky because we had no code. It was not protected. Basically, you'd send a link, and somebody would put a number, 2,000. The next screen that you would see here would be enter your credit card details and hit send. So we were like, if people would do this, and we made it better, then probably more people would do that. The way we set these accounts up is actually Wufoo, this form creator, they had a free trial for up to 5 transactions. So every project had its own account. And we would run them up to 5 transactions and then make new accounts for everything. So after flatlining for a while, we made some money. So $156.10 first month that came in. So I know that wasn't much, and now we only have 4 months left, but we had proved that we could match this. There was potentially a business. but we actually needed to start building something. And we knew in order to stay alive, we had to grow at an abnormal rate. So I started looking around, thinking of different ideas of what we could do. Blogging wouldn't be good enough. We didn't have any money for ads. And during my research, I stumbled on this quote, which inspired a lot of what we do today. And this is from David Heinemeier Hansson, who's one of the founders of Basecamp and the creators of the programming language Ruby on Rails. He said, instead of trying to outspend, outsell, or outsponsor your competitors, try to outteach them. So Basecamp does a really good job of this. They actually write books. They share everything online. They're a project management tool, but they're probably some of the best teachers in any industry. And I was really inspired by this, and I thought, what if you could take out-teaching to an extreme level? Another thing that I saw was this article that was posted by the New York Times on the likelihood of appearing, so an article that circulates through people's emails. There's 3 main factors that cause an email to circulate: surprise, interest, and practical utility. The number 1 reason is practical utility. So if you can provide something useful to people, that's your highest chance of getting something moving. I didn't think I could write in a funny way at all, so I didn't think surprise was going to be an option. So practical utility, I was like, that's where we're going to focus, and we're going to solve many micro problems that people have before the problem that Crew solves. So this was kind of just running in the back of our heads. We made the first version of our site, and then we had all these extra photos. So we said, hey, that extreme value thing, we have these extra photos that we paid for that are really good. We only used 1 on our site. So what if we just put those up somewhere, gave them away for free? It's really hard finding good photos. We've got some good ones. They're just going to go to waste. We'll put them up. Anybody can use them for anything. And this was made on a Tumblr blog. So this is the original version. It was a $19 Tumblr theme. I put it together in 2 hours. And it just had 10 photos. And we were using public Dropbox links to host the photos, which I was told by Dropbox after that you can't do that. But I thought 100 people were going to find this. And that, to me, was useful enough. So an hour later, I posted it on a site called Hacker News, a site for designers, entrepreneurs, developers. Never expected anything of it. And then I got a text from the photographer that we worked with, Alejandro. He said, hey, where'd you put those photos, man? My portfolio's blowing up. I said, I only put it in one place. So I went and checked Hacker News and Twitter, and this was the feed that day. So there was a tweet every minute of that day, and there was over 20,000 photos downloaded on that first day for Unsplash. So actually the site ended up crashing because we were using the public Dropbox links. So the head of engineering from Dropbox said, hey, I saw what you guys are doing. We're going to upgrade you to the maximum plan just for the day so you can switch to something. But that was the start of Unsplash. And since then, we've seen it in all kinds of creative work. It became much bigger than we ever expected. So multi-platinum recording artists like Owl City and Tiga use them on their album covers. We've seen photos on billboards. I was actually in Winners the other day, the department store here, and they have them in the picture frames. And we even had our first selfie. So NASA is a member on Unsplash, and the first selfie we had was an astronaut selfie. This was from one of our photographers. He said, according to Unsplash, my photos have been viewed over 18 million times and downloaded over 307,000 times. That's nearly double LA and New York combined. Today on Unsplash, there's over 4 million downloads a month. And if a photo is featured on Unsplash, it will be viewed more times than the front page of the New York Times and Time magazine. So way bigger than ever. Now, what did this do to Crew? So we remember that 156 and 10 cents. So we started in May 2013 with Unsplash, and we ended up posting $900,000 in approved projects since then, and that was the primary thing that was driving everything to Crew. It accounted for about 80% of all of that. So this proved to us, and this became a philosophy that we've continued to use today, creating extreme value. How can you create extreme value? I hate the word marketing, but we understand what we're talking about when we say it. So I think one of the things to think about is the best marketing is when you don't know it's marketing. And you see a good ad, you don't feel it's marketing because you laughed. You see a good post or something like that, you don't feel it's marketing because it's useful. And that's where we went with everything. This was actually covered by Fast Company, so they did a story on us about this, and we've released 10 other projects since then. We try to do actually one a month. And our tools, even today, account for about 50% of all of our revenue. So this is that graph when we had Unsplash started in the first few months. So since then, over a 2.5-year period, we're approaching about $30 million in approved projects on Crew. These are all freelance contracts, high quality and vetted, being matched with professionals across 32 countries and 102 cities. So right now on Crew, there's actually 1,940 custom apps being made. And these are high quality, vetted. A lot of these turn out to be really substantial things, useful things. One example I like to show is at Apple's iPad event last year, when they were demoing the iPad, they showed off an app that was made on Crew, which was basically Skype for telling bedtime stories. So it was a really interesting way of how the technology could work, and this was made from 2 people on Crew who met through Crew. And what I think is interesting is it's become much bigger than software. This is one of my favorite quotes from one of our members. Crew changed the way I work, and with that, how I live. This is bigger than a piece of software. It actually is impacting people's livelihood. This is their actual how they make money and how they do everything. So just to go back to a story of romance and reality and what's the whole lesson here. I think sometimes, we all have these ideas and you picture this really big vision, but sometimes that can paralyze you from starting. You think, oh, I got all these things and it's going to be this big, but it makes it hard to start because you think you have to do all these things at once. And the challenge is everything is never going to figure itself out. So you're always going to think that there's a perfect time to do something, but that perfect time is never going to come. The world doesn't want to change. There will never be a perfect time. And this is why we have trouble moving from romance to reality. Whether it's moving from Wisconsin to Montreal, whether it's starting a company, starting something that you want to do, anything that you want to do. But to move from romance to reality, the way you do that is by starting and solving the first problem. You don't have to look at that big vision out there. Just look at that first thing. And if you solve that first one, you're already going to be 90% ahead of everybody else. One of my favorite quotes that illustrates this is from the movie and the book, The Martian. So Matt Damon, he's stranded on Mars. He's got to get home, and he's all on his own trying to figure it out. And he says that at some point, everything is going to go south on you. Everything is going to go south, and you're going to say, this is it. This is how I end. Now you can either accept that, or you can get to work. And the way you do that, he says this right after, you just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, then you solve the next one, and the next, and if you solve enough problems, you get to go home. And this applies to all of these examples. That's how you move from romance to reality, and you'll be surprised how far you can get. And through all this 7 years, living in the basement, sleeping in the same bed as my wife's brother, but I married the girl that I saw there, and we started this company that is impacting a lot of lives. The number one reason companies die is founders give up. So if you believe in something or someone and you don't give up and you just keep solving problems, it doesn't really matter what you have. Eventually you'll get somewhere, and somewhere is better than nowhere. Thank you.